talk about Ash Wednesday, because I think that's going to be an easy segue into the third chapter here of this. So what's good about Ash Wednesday? In general, that's a yearly thing that people do. What's meaningful about Ash Wednesday?
Begins the walk to the cross for
Mm-hmm.
me. Remembering Christ and and I think you brought this out, and he knows me, who I am, and so forth, and so I want to walk with him along that path. That's what it means to me.
Okay. What did you besides you can tell me more about your feelings of Ash Wednesday, but also what did you hear that we talked about or focused on last night with Ash Wednesday?
Well, I'm just going to say that I like your theme, let go and let God.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Well, I'm just saying that I do like it because that's something that I practiced for a long time.
I'm going to be honest, what I decided to do, and I've been tongue-in-cheek about, hey, we had some events, and I was like, let's plan them on the worst possible day for people. I did say, I'm just going to keep this pretty simple. Sometimes I stack up a lot of stuff, and it's just like, and sometimes the stuff is like a cleaning out for Lent, or simple for Lent, or this time it was like, I'm just going to practice the simple. Like I'm not going to have a big heavy theme. I'm just going to say let go, let God. And that's, you talked about walking in the season of Lent. I tried to sort of hit hard that we don't walk by having all of our stuff put together, that we don't walk by saying, well, if I just do A, B, and C properly, then I'm walking. I was trying to hit pretty hard on the idea of the closer walk with thee is God does that. God comes to us. And so the letting go is just sort of sitting down it's distinct things that we have going on. And sometimes we make, faith is really hard. I really believe, I know that, I've felt that, but sometimes we make it more difficult than it needs to be. Just sitting in there and letting go, it can be enough. It doesn't have to be do these 10 steps and walk with God. Sometimes it's just, how do I let go of this for a little while? I tried to make the Lent theme this year pretty simple and not stack a bunch of stuff up and not... I feel like it's just so loud everywhere else that I didn't need to be loud. I just needed to... It was, on purpose, I tried to talk about sitting in, letting go is like sitting in weakness instead of pretending like you're... Don't even bother the energy of pretending like you're not weak. And people will say, I don't know that I do that. Well, we do. That's what getting out of bed is every day. When you get dressed, we're all sort of putting on this stuff that's like prepare, like the stuff we need to get done. That's, and I tried to talk about, just sitting down into the place where all you can do is sort of let go. Ash Wednesday, there's no biblical precedent. There's no, like, you turn to, you turn to Ruth 1:5 and it says, celebrate Ash Wednesday and thou shalt. There's no biblical precedent for this. But there's Job sitting in sackcloth and ash. And there's some of like we ask where God is. It's okay to have things that are not things that make us thrilled, but sometimes we get up and pretend like they're not even happening to us. We're going to tell everybody we're fine. So we're kind of just taking off that armor for a few times. Not I'm not telling you to walk around and unload on every single person, but at church and other places, it's okay to walk in and just be okay with what you have going on, and know that God comes to us, right? And that can be easy to talk about. It's a Lenten practice because it's hard to practice sometimes. Anything else you want to talk about with Lent or with Ash Wednesday?
How far back does Ash Wednesday go?
That is a great question, and I do not know the answer to that, and I could definitely Google it. My assumption with church things is that it's going to be rooted in a Roman Catholic practice that goes back probably not all the way to Jesus himself, but probably shortly thereafter. I somewhat talked about this last night. Part of the armor we put on is how put together, like for Jesus and for the early world of the Roman Catholic Church, it would be how put together we are. Hey, we have this great government with beautiful aqueducts, and we're so advanced as people. That's part of the armor we put on every day of like, hey, I'm contributing to this society that's so scientific or so great or so whatever. And I think Ash Wednesday, even from the beginning, is a sitting in sort of the opposite place, which just says sometimes this doesn't work. I'm sitting in the idea that sometimes all this system which we love and that is great, the medical system that's built up that can do miraculous things. I've talked to you all about how last summer I had a friend that's my age that suddenly had leukemia, was in the hospital, and they literally told him 2 years ago, we didn't have this and you would have died. You would have died in days. And they said, but we've figured out that arsenic is the solution to this, and so it's going to be rough, but you're likely going to be okay. I mean, the medical field has come a long way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. I'm not here to tell you how horrible it, but also, if you've interacted with the medical field or any government office or any business, insurance, or as far as we've come, we've also dropped the ball for people at times too. And Lent is not a like blind acceptance of the ball being dropped, but it's a sort of saying no one meant for the ball to get dropped. It got dropped, and now I need God to let me know what's going to be next here. I don't know. Sometimes we heap this sort of extra stuff on ourselves, and Lent is a time to sort of just let that go. So that's what we'll try to do.
601 AD.
601, that's pretty
Pope
late.
Gregory established
That's pretty late,
Ash
actually.
Wednesday and moved to start Lent 46 days before Easter.
Do you know why it's 46 days? I do not observe this, but you don't really observe it on Sundays.
Sundays.
Yeah.
I don't really do this, so we'll call Lent 1, and I'll
But
treat
the
it
early
like Lent.
church placed ashes on their heads and wore penitential habit to receive reconciliation on Holy Thursday, which would have been the Thursday before.
And so we go back to Luther, who felt like the church had become its own institution, trying for its own stuff instead of a place that cared for people. And so there's always this call back to be cared for, and really it isn't great institutions of the church that take care of us. It's God, and so we just sort of move into that. 601 for a church thing is kind of late.
Well, that was when it was established as,
Yeah.
but they had put crosses on.
Yeah, the grieving and the cross stuff has really ancient precedent, but observing it as Ash Wednesday, I did not know that. So, anything else you want to talk about with Ash Wednesday?
I like the fact of when you said, remember, Jesus understood being weak because he came and lived among us. And I think sometimes I forget that I know I am weak and you are strong, and I look at that, but I understand that concept because Jesus understands me.
I think I tried to talk about God's weakness, which is borderline. It's not an orthodox. It's sort of heretical to say God's weak. But what I was trying to talk about was, we've built up how strong God has to be, that all the time we're telling everybody what scripture they have to listen to be like, if you just do this commandment better, then you'll be strong and everything will be fine. And that's not been my experience. That a person doesn't have to be an evil person. That could be a person who is doing a lot of stuff, and stuff can still not feel right, or something can still happen. It seems to me like the message of creation and of God is that God, weakness and brokenness is part of our existence, and part of the story is that God didn't shy away from it. God wasn't afraid of it and enters into it. And so we talked about that some last night, of just trying to talk about getting back to the basic of just, if these things are on your mind, these need to be things you're cared for and supported in.
Well, I think, you go back and read Isaiah 53, and it talks about how he was despised and rejected by men, and he was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And, he entered into the same kind of pain and suffering and rejection and sorrow, so he can understand. And then in Hebrews, where it talks about that he's a high priest, that he understands where we are, so he can intercede for us.
Well, I mean, he was partly human, and don't forget,
Totally human.
one of his last prayers was, can you take this cup from me? But it's not my will, it's yours. That was, to me, that was kind of admitting, I am feeling a little bit...
I'm not going to answer this. I'm going to leave this as rhetorical. On Sunday, I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to tell you all that Jesus. Our text for Sunday is Luke 4, and Jesus is tested by the devil. And I'm going to say, in the wilderness, I'm going to say, I made this look like the wilderness as much as I could. And
I liked the way the sanctuary looked.
Good. We make it a wilderness. You come in, and just as Jesus was tested by the devil, I'm going to test you. I'll play the devil. I'll test you. Why Jesus? Why does Jesus have to enter into a place that's human? Why does God have to do it? Now, I'm not going to answer it now. I'm just going to leave it out there as a tease. I'm going to ask you that. Why does Jesus do this? My bet is that we don't usually have the answer as full or roundedly as we should. And I'll talk more about that Sunday. So there you go. A little bit of a tease of why human. There's a lot to why Jesus did that, and God is making a choice in that. And we entered into that on Ash Wednesday by saying God is choosing to be weak. Why? I mean, that's what I'm saying, that part rhetorically. Why choose to be weak? And just as the devil tested Jesus, I'll test you with that. Why Jesus? What's the point? How does Jesus save us? Why human? So I'll jump onto that. The chapter we're in Hamilton is chapter 3, and to me it links pretty well to what we're talking about. So I could sort of reflect and move into this both. The scripture at the beginning of the chapter is Luke 18, and it's Jesus told this parable to certain people. So the framework of a parable, sometimes we just blow past this. I probably am too into this, and maybe you don't have to be quite so John, but it's important to pay attention to this. The framework of these tells a lot of what's trying to be said. Jesus told this parable to certain people who had convinced themselves that they were righteous, and who looked at everyone else with disgust. So trying to pretend like you're the put together one, or that you've got it, that I go to this church and this church has the answers, and if everybody else would just follow those commandments properly, none of these problems would ever happen. I mean, that's
I've known some of those.
that's a cultural reflection. I mean, we're living in a world now where our politicians talk like that. They use scripture like that. And we, churches speak like that. I did not write this. This is Luke. Jesus told this parable to certain people who had convinced themselves that they were righteous and who looked on everyone else with disgust. So sort of denying weakness, right? They're pretending like they don't have a weakness, which is, on the top of what I talked about, but then also it's Lenten, but it's also Lucan. And then here's the parable. Two people went up, and he's telling this into the face of people who don't want to hear it. Two people went up to the temple to pray. And hey, we're thrilled. That's what you're supposed to do. So good for these two people. Good job. One was a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. And we automatically now, because we're Bible people, we know the code. We know this is a real reversal and a real kick to the shins here for Jesus to talk like this. One was a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed about himself with these words: God, I thank you that I am not like everyone else, crooks, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. And think of that Matthew 6 reading of how Jesus and how Matthew 6 talks about behaving when you're fasting or when you're giving. The Pharisee says, I give 1/10 of everything I receive. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He wouldn't even lift his eyes to look toward heaven. Rather, he struck his chest, his own chest. So he's locked inside of his own affliction here, or his own sounds like he's upset that he even has to be a tax collector. Why do I have to stoop to this job? I'm stuck. I have to feed people. I don't want this job. I have to do it. Strikes his own chest. God, show mercy to me. I'm a sinner. I tell you, this person went down to his home justified rather than the Pharisee. All who lift themselves up will be brought low, and those who make themselves low will be lifted up. So you can tell that feels Lenten, right? That feels very similar to what we're talking about. I always have to make sure I insert plenty of times during Lent. I am not trying to be a masochist here. It's really important that I say this a lot during Lent, because I think the problem will be, well, he's really, talking about how pain-ridden we have to be. I'm not saying I want you to be. I'm not wishing pain or bad news on you. I'm just telling you that it's likely at any, we go through it. And what I see in the tax collector is this sort of being prepared. We have things on the agenda ahead of us that we may not be looking forward to. And God prepares us for that by sort of building, like we if we're weak, we let go and we give it to God. I think there's this then being prepared, or this coming strength that we get. We can go into Hamilton, we can talk about what you hear in that reading. We can do whatever you want from here. I didn't plan this, but I feel like that hits the Lenten theme pretty well. So remember, Luke loves the stories of God reaching out and meeting people in weakness. Luke is a good Lenten year to have Luke. Anything you all want to talk about? How do you feel? Have you ever met a Pharisee?
Yep.
Remember I told you Pastor Kevin told me I was a Pharisee because I was on church council.
Really?
I didn't want to be a Pharisee.
I think what we're and again I had some threads of this last night talking about it. I think what we've experienced in the church is the church has given a lot of people a lot of excuses to not be a part of a church. You know, over the course of a long time, we've sort of been seduced by how powerful we're going to be. And a lot of, I think this is greatly exaggerated. And we can talk about this more. But I always give you all the proverbial talking to people in line at the grocery store. And that's a proverbial, could be anywhere. But I do talk to people. And often if people know what I do, I go to college visits and you have to go around the room and with the parents. And you have to be like, what do you do for a living? And when I say it, I will get people who come up to me afterwards and be like, well, I used to go. I've met so many St. Stephen used to goes. I know more used to goes, people from the used to go group of St. Stephen than you can imagine. I come across them all the time. Used to goes, and they tell me, and they basically all tell me. I mean, their individual experiences are different, but they all basically tell me somebody did something that made them a used to go.
The nuns, that was it.
Yeah.
He calls them the nuns and duns.
Nuns. So I've talked about nuns before, and people have been like, what are you talking about? And I have to be like, N-O-N-E-S. Nuns are the... this book was written and put in print, and again, I haven't spent enough time with this yet, and you know that I'm fascinated by it because I've talked about it now in 2 places. That word comes from Pew Studies that study the religion in the United States, and people have, in an increasing rate, marked none. They'll still often say they're Christian. I think it's something like 80% will mark Christian, but they'll put none on religious affiliate, like which church they attend. So that's where that language of nuns comes from. And you heard me talk about this, I think, in Sunday school last week and then even last night. For the first time in my memory of looking at Pew Studies, this year's showed no decline in that. It's the first time in 26 years of reading those that there's been no decline in nuns this year. That I don't know what that means yet, but I meet a lot of used to goes, a lot of people who have. I am usually of the opinion that the story they're telling me is not really the full story of why they are used to goes. I don't, in a grocery store, often get the opportunity to go deeper into that, but my usual assumption is that there's more to the story than the curtain fight or the chair being turned this direction or that direction, that the fight was over.
Well, we're all Pharisees.
What's
I'm hoping
happened
to be recovering Pharisees, as he said.
That's it, like this
I like
recovery.
his wording on that.
What's happening in the
And
United
sometimes
States?
he falls off the wagon.
Yes.
I like that terminology.
What's happening in the United States, and I read this in a book called Seculosity. As we become nuns, our religious fervor isn't being removed. It's just being put on other things. So when people say, I'm not going to go to church because the fervor that person had over the curtains and the fight we had caused me to just be like, I don't want to deal with this, they're not escaping people's Pharisee tendencies, which we all have. Even the person telling me that has it. They're being expressed now in places where we don't know how to handle it. And then this book has different chapters. So parents yelling at basketball games. Their 4-year-old got called for travel and they think that it's going to eliminate their ability to play in the NBA. And so they're going nuts. religious sort of fervor going into politics, like how we're political. The difference is that when you have church, the hope is that even though some churches are huge, they usually will ask you to be in part of a small group somewhere where you're kind of having to sit with people and having to wrestle with their Pharisee tendencies and yours. Now that we have so many nuns, those tendencies are not gone. They're just moved over to other places that are currently ill-equipped to handle those things. The political system in the United States is ill-equipped to handle this fervor that was used to be plugged into churches, where you could have some time where you would have to wrestle with it. You don't get a chance to wrestle with it, and so it just goes unfettered. This Pharisee thing that he's talking about. I can't speak to what Pastor Coven meant when he told you that. I think what he meant was you're part of the religious system. I think. I don't know, but we all have Pharisee. And a recovering Pharisee is a Adam Hamilton chapter 3 section, and I think the point of the parable that he starts the paragraph with is that it's okay to be a recovering Pharisee. It's not okay to be a denial Pharisee, a Pharisee in denial.
Well, that was Paul. Paul was a good Pharisee.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
and he says that.
he
says that about himself.
He says that about
I was a good
himself.
Pharisee.
He was a good Pharisee,
Mm-hmm.
and so he knew all the rules. He followed all of those regulations, and then he found that once he became blind to the world around him, however you want to look at that, he then realized that that was not all there was. But you can tell when you read some of the letters of Paul, he needs to recover again. Some of the things that he does and some of the things that he says, upon which a lot of the modern church has been based, including the Lutheran Church, is that, he got back into that Pharisee mindset, which we all can do.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I'm not immune to it either, but he would do that. But I think once you realize you're a recovering one, you have to take a look at where you are and what you believe in. Myself, how I believe, how I'm going to live a Christian life, and not say I'm better than you, or I'm better than you. I'm weak and I need Christ in my life. But we're all there.
We need a system that prepares us. We need a thing to draw from that would give us rules or guidance in case a thing happens to us.
I thought when he said that and afterwards that he was referring to the fact that when you're on church council, you have rules and regulations that you have to.
And you have to have be a nurse without rules. Be a grandparent, or be a teacher, or be a pastor without rules. I mean, the rules have to exist. What happens to us, and this is another plug I'll put in for myself. This is essentially this is essentially the theme of the back pew studies during Lent. During Lent, each Sunday school hour, I'll do a back pew. I just call them that because we sit in the back, and it'll be a Sunday school. And this is sort of the theme of them, is that you have to have rules. It's much easier to pretend like you have a rule and you're inflexible than it is to live in real life when you have to make the rules fit. Life and faith is on the ground where you know the rule, which is this optimal thing of what you're looking for, but you have to live in this place where now you have to make the rule fit the person. And that makes it sound like I'm being sort of wishy-washy. I'm not saying that the rule isn't the rule. I'm saying you've all come to a spot where the rule in the handbook sort of accidentally doesn't cover the thing that you're sitting with. It's not on purpose. It just skirts. It wasn't meant to. It doesn't know the complexity of the situation. And so now you have to take the rule and you have to say, how do I turn that into what I'm going to say for this person? Or, by the end of Lent, we may talk some about homosexuality, and I think this is part of that. It's been, in the history of the ELCA, really easy for people who have left our churches to say, well, that's the rule. You're not following it, I'm gone. I think, okay, you know the biblical context of the rule. However, you do not know how to not be a Pharisee with the people that you're sitting with. I'm secure in the idea that you know the rule. I hear that in what you're saying. I don't think you know the deep challenge of faith and of what we're hearing from who Jesus is that it isn't that God enters into weakness means God enters into the mess of it. If God wanted it to be a set of rules that always, every time worked, then it would be. If you look around and you've ever experienced a time when a rule didn't work, the sort of work that guided you, but you had to learn how to apply it, then you know that this is what life is. This is the existence God's called us to. I don't think God has called us to, here's 10 commandments, and now everything's all set and everybody's happy and we're done. I can show that that's not how it works.
Well, the Pharisees weren't happy with it. They had, 400 and some?
It's 600
600
and 16, I think it is.
I missed the last 200.
And I say this
But
one...
yeah, they just kept going on, and rather than...
Was it in here we talked about Mishnah? Was that last time?
Yes.
And so rabbis, not only do they have the 600 rules, they have 600 books on each of the 600 rules. It's called Mishnah. It's all the law. The lawyers have this. And I'm not trying to dispel that. I'm trying to say what a lawyer is doing is learning how to take that finding from 20 years ago and have it apply to this new thing now. There's always more books, not less. There's always more precedent that you draw from, not less. We're having real trouble with the chaos of it. And we're not facing it faithfully. And in part it's because we don't go to church. We're nuns. We have a lot of nuns. And in a lot of reasons, some of the nuns have really good reason for not going to church anymore. Some of them have, some people that I know have been, abused, flat out abused by the church. And also abused by things that happened in church. They have good reason. But again, we're talking about Lent is sort of a getting back to the foundation and setting aside the facade. And I think that's Luke of getting away from this Pharisaical stuff.
I also think an important rule that I try to live by is, yes, I come to church for what church can give me, but more so, I come to church for what I can give to the church.
I like these 2 points that he has on page 41 in Hamilton. I think these are helpful. Parables are stories that are based on law, but don't solve it. I'm going to explain what I mean by that. Mm-hmm. They give you a lot of guidance and a lot of idea and a lot of help on what you might do, but they don't actually solve your literal problem for you. You can't say, well, if I go back to Luke 8 and I do exactly what that says, then everything's fine. If I beat my chest and stand in the back, then everything will go away and I'll be okay. So he gives some ways to sort of enter into them, and it's very simple and very straightforward, and I like them. I think they're helpful. The first one is, in what ways am I like, and I would underline this, each of the characters? In what ways am I like each of the characters or objects in the parable? Sometimes the objects are meant to be the thing that teaches you, like the pearl buried in the field. Some of them use an object. My favorite parables are usually people parables, but thinking how you're like the Pharisee and the tax collector. One of the first ways that a parable goes off the rails is when you walk into church and the assumption is, well, I'm the tax collector. Look at me. Look how good I am. I worship well in the temple like the tax collector. I'm humble and stand in the back. You know what you've done when you do that? You've actually proven to me that you're the Pharisee. As crazy as that is. You know what so that you're trying to be both of the characters means that you're trying to say, I'm not going to beat myself up. I have moments where I have worshipped well, but I have other moments where I could do better, right? So I like that it gives you that one. And then what does Jesus want me to know, think, or do in response to this parable? That makes it a law, but that it's something that helps you enter into how to apply what God's up to. So you have some law in this parable that has to do with the proper way to enter into worship. There's some law about, the good news is they're both going up to the temple, so they're doing great, right? But there's some, even once you're there, things can go off the rails. So what is it that Jesus wants us to do? And then a lot of the chapter is left about that. But I like these. These are two really good, handy things to enter into a parable with. Because, if Jesus wouldn't have spoken in parables, I'm not even sure the church would exist. I don't think, let's put it this way. The church might exist, but my job would be way different. You wouldn't need people going up there expounding on stuff. Maybe you'd be grateful for that. John wouldn't have a talk. Maybe John wouldn't have a talk about this at all. The fact that it's a parable is no different than the Mishnah on the rabbi's shelf. That's a sermon is sort of a chapter in a book of Mishnah where you're just trying to say, let's try to process this. If Jesus didn't speak in parables, we wouldn't have to process it. We would have rules. We would all just punish people. One of Luther's quotes is about government, and he said, "Thank God that this is a deep paraphrase. Thank God there's a government because you wouldn't want people using the sword to enforce the Bible. But you need someone with a sword to enforce things sometimes, or else this would be a really crappy existence." So I'm not going to tell the police. I'm not going to tell the police when to wield the baton. I shouldn't say it that way. It isn't that you're not in interaction with when to wield the baton, but they're the ones doing the job, and they know that they've the ones that have been trained and are trying to apply the rules of their job. We've vilified people even though they're trying to do a hard job. And the church sort of has to live in how do we help them do their job better? Teachers, policemen, anything like that. Anything else you want to talk about from this chapter in Hamilton? We're talking about the third chapter.
Yeah, I'd like to say something that I've been thinking about this, and you guys will probably think about it too. And the parable of the Good Samaritan. I have seen and heard so much about somebody that does something good and then to help somebody else, and then they'll say, the Good Samaritan. Do you know what I mean? I mean, they'll come, like, you'll hear it on TV or something.
Absolutely.
And I often wondered about that, if they, do they really know the story of the Good Samaritan? It says they kind of bring that out of context sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. It's become...
Do you understand what
when a thing enters common parlance
Yeah.
and gets used, so you'll hear Good Samaritan laws.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it is now removed from the church's discussion or faith discussion of what that story really is. I'll give you a practical thing where I'll sort of talk about what you're... In 2019, St. Stephen and I, in the Council of St. Stephen, the Pharisees all gathered together.
The Pharisees.
And we began to work on the Constitution of the Church. It had something like some clearly thing, like it calls in the Constitution for us to have two annual meetings, one in January and one in November. And I'm like, we don't get a lot of attendance at one. We don't really need, a lot of congregations don't have two. This is a thing we can change. So there were several things we entered into changing. The number of seats on council, then this thing, the Constitution has all these committees on it, like 12 committees that don't meet. So like we could clean this up together in a way that talks about the rules and what our hopes are. In 2020, COVID hit while we were in mid-project. One of the ways that the process for the Constitution works is, I'm going to get this mixed up. Don't quote me on this, but it has this back and forth thing where like a council approves it, it goes to the congregation, they get to see the changes, they approve it, then it goes to the Synod, and they have constitutional parliamentarians that read it and say, well, you accidentally contradicted yourself here on this one. And the ELCA does not have governance at the higher levels over congregations. So a bishop doesn't come in here and say you have to, but they do have a model constitution that your constitution, in part, like I believe in Jesus Christ, has to be in your constitution. There's things that have to be in it. The ELCA, while we were working on our constitution, changed, and this is to what Nancy, I'm finally to what Nancy was talking about. They changed inside the Constitution to say all churches in the ELCA, and this is in the model Constitution, so it would have to be in yours if you changed it, are sanctuary churches. They were using a word, sanctuary. They were using that word circa 2018, 2019, 2020. What do you think they were talking about?
Illegals.
They weren't talking about sanctuary the way that we talk about a sanctuary. And that, between COVID and that word, I was a little bit like, it got slowed, and it's still sitting out there not done, the Constitution. Because the debate became, are they using this word in the way that we use it? Just to be clear, my understanding of churches is that they're sanctuary because just by being a church. Now, if this changed, I would stand corrected, but that like ICE does not go into churches anyway. So if someone goes into church to worship, ICE is not going to invade that worship space to detain somebody. So that started to be like, well, why do we need this language in here? And is it the theological sense of what a sanctuary is, or are we into like a political sense of it? That's a law and some rules and some things that you talk about that then you're trying to learn how to apply it well. And you're not the Pharisee, you're not the tax collector, and you're stuck in a group of people trying to figure it out. The Bible's filled with text about hospitality and offering care to people. But then we also have to be careful of our words that have theological meaning being taken up politically and being used in a way that's different than what we mean for them to be used. A lot to think about.
Was it for illegals, or is it to be a place of worship?
That's
Because
where the
in
Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that idea
He
that
was
there's
the first one
sanctuary inside of sanctuary
sanctuary.
has long held. My sense would be that the word sanctuary is theological and biblical, and that it then went into Carl, like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. When he's saying sanctuary, now we have two definitions of that word. Prior to that, there was only one, and it's a place where you gather. It's a holy place that you gather, and you really are on break from me walking around with a sword saying, "You just confessed what?" I mean, it is supposed to be a
Thank
place.
God.
It is supposed to be a place where you're coming before God. Like, think of a burnt offering.
yeah,
That you're coming before God to to weigh down. It might be the place where you say, I've committed A, B, and C, and now I need to go behave. God loves me, but now I need to go do D, E, F because of this. The word sanctuary, that politically and sort of branched off from that, has other things we have to weigh. So the Constitution from here is eventually going to go to the LCA, and the word sanctuary will be in it, because we can't leave it half done.
Well, how does the ELCA define the word?
So you'd have to call them. I'm not going to speak for them. My sense would be that they meant it in the political way.
Yeah, I think so.
Probably if it was 2018.
I stopped.
2019, yeah.
I did not stop on the Constitution because we can just stop. I stopped because in COVID, I did not think, with everybody spread all out all over the place, it was going to be a good time to have something that people are going to have questions about.
And I think that is a hard thing when you look at developing church procedures, rules to follow. Every organization needs them. That you realize that there can be a double meaning to those terminologies.
But you have to enter into it anyway, and you have to
That's
do it in a
right.
way that's not and you don't want to on purpose have nuns, but you have to have the rule to know who you are, to know how to apply stuff. And so St. Stephen has to be a safe place where we come and talk about it, where some people dissent and some people don't, and yet we still stay worshiping. And
You can't say all are welcome here and then say, but you can't come. Or you can't, Jane, you're not welcome here because of this or that. Because you are not a citizen of the United States.
Yeah.
So
And you're getting into
there's
the
those fine
territory
points,
of
yeah.
people will say, well, now people will say, well, what you're hoping to do is use your building to intentionally house people and protect them. And I would say, no, that's not what we're not legally able to house people here. But I would say that everybody deserves the right to come into worship without being, for that moment, I don't know what the right word is, I'm thinking pestered, but that's not the right word, affected by the thing that they're trying to ask for forgiveness from. There has to be a space to ask for forgiveness where you can do it, and that's what a sanctuary is. So, a lot to think about there. Churches have to wrestle with stuff, and that wrestling is how we grow. We do it as Pharisees and non-Pharisees at the same time. We're both characters. And then, those words, if we're not careful, branch off. People use them, and they use them incorrectly. And pastors, especially Lutheran pastors, are real big on the right word and then talking about that one word for days. So,
To death.
Right. That's a big Lutheran thing. Talk about what that word means. So that's partly what we do in Lent, is we take these things and we weigh them. And then we let go, we kind of let go. So next week we'll be on chapter 4.